Get nicked. That's what they told her. Not as a joke, not in private, in a locked room, during a security strip search on a US military base. 3 men, fake scanners, no witnesses. They didn't know her name, didn't know her rank, didn't know what her silence actually meant. Because the woman they forced out of her uniform wasn't admin, wasn't logistics, she was a Navy SEAL Admiral. Tier 1, embedded, armed with clearance, recording, and the authority to burn their entire system down. And by the time she was done, the room was wreckage. The men were restrained, and the entire contractor network behind them wiped from 9 military bases before sunrise, before we show you exactly what she did next, and how she exposed a hidden culture of abuse buried inside routine procedure. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because this time, they told the wrong woman to get undressed, and she undressed their whole operation instead. They called it the gray zone because nothing here belonged to anyone, yet everyone answered to it. A naval logistics checkpoint, stamped with enough Department of Defense paperwork to look legitimate from afar, but run day to day by contracted hands that didn't wear the flag on their shoulder. It sat on a flat strip of sun-baked island asphalt, just far enough from the main base to feel like a different world. No parade decks, no ceremonial salutes, just shipping containers, chain link fences, and a permanent haze of humidity hanging in the air like a wet sheet. Personnel rotated through constantly, Marines cycling back from field training, Navy techs rerouted from ships, supply officers passing through with sealed manifests, and every one of them knew the same rule. You didn't argue here, not because the place was dangerous in the normal sense, there were no mortars, no incoming fire, but there was something worse, jurisdictional fog, the kind that made people feel uncertain about what they were allowed to refuse, the kind that let a man with a contractor badge speak like command. The checkpoint's main building was a squat, windowless block with a faded sign that read Integrity Processing Annex, as if it were some noble mission instead of an extraction funnel. Around it, DefSur Ops personnel moved with lazy confidence, hands on hips, coffee cups in gloved fingers, radios clipped to their shoulders like ornaments. Most of them were former service. Some talked like it. Some tried too hard to. She arrived just after dawn, when the air was thick enough to taste, and the first shift was still shaking sleep out of their eyes. No entourage, no convoy, just a single government transport van that rolled up, stopped at the gate, and left her standing on the gravel as if she were any other body on the roster. She wore a standard uniform, nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention, no visible rank, no ribbons. Her hair was tight to the nape, regulation, and forgettable. A plain ID band sat on her wrist with a designation that would have made most people assume admin, liaison. The only thing that didn't match the label was the way she stood, not rigid, not nervous, loose enough to move, still enough to watch, like she belonged in places where people didn't ask permission before they hurt you. A contractor at the gate glanced at her ID, then at her face. He didn't recognize her, which made him relax. That was the mistake. He leaned back in his chair, chewing on something like he had time to waste. "You here for records or command watch?" he asked, loud enough for the other men nearby to hear. 2 of them looked over, smirked. The smirk said what their mouths didn't. "You don't look like anyone who matters." She didn't react. She didn't blink faster. She simply met the man's eyes for one steady beat and answered in a calm voice that carried no apology and no challenge. "Neither." That wiped the smirk off his face for half a second, just long enough for confusion to flicker. Then it came back, sharper. "Then what are you, some kind of inspector?" She didn't correct him, because she wasn't here to be believed. She was here to see what happened in the gray zone when the wrong kind of woman walked in and didn't leave on their terms. The men at the checkpoint didn't waste time pretending this was standard. The lead contractor, stocky, unshaven, wearing a DefSur patch that looked like it had been sewn on by boredom, glanced at her ID band, then back at the display on his tablet. A pause, a frown, A theatrical tap on the screen. Huh, he muttered, loud enough for the other two to hear. ID mismatch. Tags not syncing with the DoD relay server. It was nonsense. The local server wasn't even hardwired, just a private relay built on whatever government leasing tech was left over from 10 rotations ago, but he said it like gospel, and the other men played along. You want to check her in PI Zone 3? The lanky one asked, already turning toward the interior corridor. The lead nodded. Just a formality. She didn't object, she didn't flinch, just raised one brow slightly and said, proceed. PI Zone 3, Private Integrity Zone, wasn't marked. It didn't have a door tag or inspection log. It wasn't even on the site map for transient personnel. But everyone on the contractor side knew exactly what it was for. It was the room they used when they wanted silence to look like compliance. She followed without needing direction. One walked ahead, two behind. Subtle shaping of movement meant to corral. They didn't speak, neither did she. The hallway narrowed as they reached the last row of side offices, converted from old maintenance storage. Fluorescent lights buzzed, flickered, then steadied again as they approached the door. One of them punched in a 4-digit code. The door hissed slightly as it opened. Inside, the room was small, hot, and smelled faintly of boot rubber and old Freon. One camera lens in the corner blinked red, but it wasn't connected. It hadn't been in years. Step inside, the lead said. She did. He followed. The others closed the door behind them. It locked with a click. Remove all gear, he said. She unstrapped her boots, pulled the belt from her waist, folded it, laid it on the table. Jacket. She removed it slowly, deliberately, folded it too, laid it next to the belt. One of the men reached for her sleeve, as if inspecting a non-existent patch. His fingers brushed fabric, too slow, too casual, not part of any search protocol. She didn't react. They moved to her shirt, requesting access to her inner pockets. She opened them. Empty. The third man circled, saying nothing, just watching her spine. ID's not syncing still, the lead said again, tapping the screen theatrically. That means we're cleared for secondary. Secondary wasn't in any manual. But that didn't stop him from using the word like it was doctrine. Secondary? She asked, voice neutral. Body check, he clarified. Just visual. Standard. A beat passed. She didn't challenge it, didn't play dumb. She gave the same calm, measured response she'd given before. Proceed. They didn't understand what that word meant, because what they heard was permission, but what she gave them was rope. They always used the same tone right before the shift, the one that pretended formality, but dripped with something colder underneath. Just need to run the scanner again, said the man holding the wand. A piece of black plastic molded to resemble an actual metal detector. It wasn't powered, it had no display, but he moved it with exaggerated seriousness, sweeping it down her arms, her torso, lower. He didn't touch skin, not yet, but he got close. Too close. The second contractor adjusted the overhead lamp. It cast a sharper glare down her chest and shoulders, angled deliberately to hit the one corner the dummy camera didn't cover. He stepped back, arms folded, as if he were just waiting to see if anything pinged. The third stayed behind her, always behind, watching not the procedure, but her body. Standards gotten real thorough these days, one of them muttered. Gotta keep everything tight. She didn't reply. Her face didn't shift. No raised brow, no inhale. No trace reaction. It was the silence that made them bolder. The one with the scanner stopped in front of her again. All right, we'll need the undershirt now. Could be blocking the sensor. He said it like a mechanic asking for a hood to be popped. She didn't move right away, just stared at him for half a beat longer than polite. Then she reached up, undid the top buttons of her uniform shirt, and began unfastening it. Methodical, one at a time. The third man leaned forward slightly, and the second laughed under his breath. The shirt opened at the front, plain black undershirt beneath, regulation cut. We're gonna need all layers off, the second man said from the corner. The room didn't blink. She looked directly at him, still calm, still flat. Clarify, he grinned. I said, remove all layers. She held still for 1 second, then said, say it clearly. It was not a challenge. It was a command disguised as request. He didn't notice, thought it was submission, so he leaned in just slightly, voice lowering. Get nicked. That was the word. The one that snapped the mask of protocol off their faces. The air got still. She nodded once, slowly, and began lifting her undershirt. No flinch, no shame, no protest. But there was something new in the way her chest rose. Not alarm, not tension. Calibration, breath depth increasing, shoulders adjusting, spine settling into control posture. The scanner man smiled wider. He didn't finish the sentence because she was already adjusting her footing. Not noticeably, just enough to shift center mass from compliance to control. They hadn't crossed the line, they'd buried it. And now, they were standing on top of a tripwire, one they didn't even see. They mistook her stillness for shock. That was how it always worked in rooms like this. Men convinced themselves that silence meant compliance, that obedience meant weakness, that a woman who didn't scream was a woman who didn't know what to do. The scanner man took a half step closer, the fake wand hovering near her ribs like a prop in a bad performance. The second contractor leaned against the filing cabinet, arms crossed, smirking as if he'd already won something. The third stayed behind her shoulder, close enough that she could feel his breath on the back of her neck. She didn't look away. Her uniform shirt hung open now, but she kept her movements measured, procedural, like she was following an actual checklist. She lifted the hem of her undershirt just enough for them to see she was listening, just enough for them to think they were in control. And then the third man reached forward. His fingers slid toward her waistband, not to search for contraband, not to check for a weapon, just to claim the moment, to make the humiliation real. Her right hand came down slowly like she was adjusting fabric. Her fingertips brushed the inner seam of her belt line. To them, it looked like nerves, a tiny tremor, a self-conscious gesture. It wasn't. It was a trigger. A tactile pulse sensor stitched into the inside of her waistband vibrated once, silent and sharp. A micro device no larger than a coin tied into a concealed body cam feed and encrypted uplink. Not to the base, not to DefSur Ops, not to anyone on the island. Straight to Naval Command Tier Review, straight to the kind of oversight that didn't ask permission. A red dot blinked behind the lining of her shirt for half a heartbeat, then disappeared. The room stayed the same, but the balance of power didn't. She stepped her left foot back exactly 3 inches, not because she was retreating, because she was building a base. Her weight settled into the heel, hips aligning. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, loose, ready. Her breathing slowed, deeper now, combat breath, not panic. The kind of breath you take when you've spent years training your nervous system to switch from human to weapon on command. The scanner man grinned wider. "That's it," he murmured, as if he were teaching her. "Just cooperate and we'll—" The third contractor leaned in closer. The second man reached for the door, turning slightly, positioning himself between her and the exit. They were closing the cage, and she let them, because the moment mattered. Because the evidence needed one more second of clear intent, because she needed them to commit fully to the act they thought no one would ever see. The third man's hand pressed harder at her waistband. His voice dropped into a whisper. "That's better. Now." Her head turned slowly, just enough for him to see her eyes. Not scared, not angry, empty, like a scope sight. She spoke one sentence, quiet and flat, meant for the record as much as the room. "Remove your hands." He chuckled, like he didn't understand words that weren't spoken in his tone. And that was the second he made the fatal mistake, leaning forward again, weight shifting onto his toes. She moved, not with rage, not with panic, with the kind of speed that only comes from training designed to end things before they start. The gray zone didn't have alarms for this. It didn't have protocols. It didn't have a plan. Because no one here had ever tried to strip search the wrong woman, and no one here had ever watched what happened next. The fake scanner was still in his hand. That was his last mistake. She moved in a single breath. Not a burst, not a scream, not rage, just action, calculated and exact. The kind of motion you only learn after your body's been trained to solve problems at full speed, with blood in your mouth and enemies at your back. Her right arm snapped upward, not with force, but precision. hand forming a compact wedge that drove between the scanner man's wrist and elbow. The joint collapsed before he registered pain. The wand clattered harmlessly to the floor as his nervous system blinked out. Before he could fall, she'd already stepped inward. Left hand swept into his brachial plexus, that soft pocket between shoulder and neck where nerve clusters live. She didn't hit to disable. She hit to sever decision-making. His knees buckled, body sagging like a stringless marionette. Behind her, the second man lunged. Too slow. She turned, back heel pivoting hard, and let his own weight carry him forward. Her elbow struck into the radial nerve along his forearm, not enough to shatter bone, just enough to turn his reach into dead weight. As he stumbled, she dropped low, scooped under his center of gravity, and threw. He hit the floor with a controlled chest slam, spine flat, head bouncing off the matting with a dull thunk. 2 down. The third, the one who'd touched her waistband, was already yelling, not out of control, out of fear. His hand went to the comms mic clipped on his vest. Bad move. She was already moving. 3 strides closed the space. Her hand shot up, palm flat into the center of his chest, just below the collarbone. Sternum strike. It doesn't break ribs. It just makes a man forget how to stand. His back hit the wall hard enough to knock the air out of his lungs, but her hand didn't follow through. She held it just there, fingers splayed, pressure calibrated, not for destruction, but for dominance. He sank, not unconscious, not screaming, just broken, breathing hard, vision flickering, mind trying to catch up. She looked down at them. 3 men who'd spent the last 15 minutes believing they were untouchable. They weren't bleeding, they weren't crippled, but they were done, because every inch of their bravado had just been reversed. She bent slightly, retrieved the dropped scanner wand, inspected it like she was logging evidence, turned it in her palm, then laid it neatly on the edge of the table. Her shirt still hung loose. She buttoned it slowly, with the kind of composure that made it clear she hadn't lost control. She'd handed it back to herself. One of the men whimpered from the floor. She didn't look at him. She looked at the camera, the dead, blinking lens in the corner, and said flatly, "This base is now compromised." The room was silent, except for the low rasp of 3 different men trying to remember how to breathe. She didn't wait. The undershirt was rebuttoned, her regulation boots laced back up with practiced rhythm, her belt clipped back into place like she was suiting up for a post-op debrief, not walking out of a compromised interrogation room. She stepped out without urgency, just intent. Straight down the hallway, past the locker clusters and defecting security personnel who looked up as she passed, then quickly looked back down. Because something about her posture made them hesitate. She moved like someone who didn't just have clearance. She was clearance. At the comms desk, a junior technician leaned over a control console that buzzed faintly with static. He barely glanced up. "Can I?" She placed her wallet badge on the desk without a word. It didn't flash gold. It didn't scream for attention. It was matte black, unadorned, with a soft-coated tear seal embedded behind the ID laminate. The technician's words died mid-sentence as his eyes flicked from the wallet to the lines of authority embedded beneath it. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to touch anything at all. "You're active military?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "I'm embedded." She tapped the center of the badge once, confirming the body cam feed ping. The sensor had already uploaded everything. The technician's eyes widened slightly. That's not a standard naval observer tag. It's not supposed to be." She leaned in slightly. "Patch through to flag command, authorization code, seal NESC Victor 4 tier." He didn't argue, just typed. The screen flared once with an encryption check, then green-lit the secure channel. A high-frequency signal locked onto satellite relay, direct to SOCOM's internal review node. "The call is live," he whispered. She turned her head slightly toward the mic. "Priority escalation. Officer-level assault recorded on DoD-cleared liaison under falsified security protocol. Immediate lockdown authorization requested for contract ID prefix DSO. Site designation Lima 407. There was no reply. Just a quiet chime, acknowledgement received. The technician stared at her. I don't think I'm allowed to." "You're not," she said calmly. "But I am." Within 60 seconds, every active badge, tied to DEFSUR's system flashed error, authorization revoked. By the 2-minute mark, the perimeter gate locked. 3 minutes in, the helipad pinged a redirected route signal from a naval police gunship stationed off the Joint Base 50 miles east. 4 minutes. She picked up her badge and turned toward the corridor without another word. The technician finally found his voice again. Who do I say made the call? She stopped, looked over her shoulder, just enough to make it personal. Admiral Nked, she said. Naval Special Warfare Command. A pause. SEAL Tier 1 Evaluation Division. And then she was gone, and the base began to shut itself down. The helipad wasn't designed for unannounced military traffic, but that didn't stop the rotors from roaring overhead exactly 8 minutes after the body cam ping had gone live. The naval police gunship dropped onto the tarmac without ceremony. No request for airspace clearance, no comms chatter. Just the womp 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 of a chopper that didn't need permission. The kind of arrival that rewrote the chain of command before anyone on base had time to fake calm. 3 armed MPs exited first, visors down, stances squared. Not contractors, not affiliated with DEFSUR Ops. These were from Joint Security Response, SEAL aligned, and everyone knew it the second their boots hit the concrete. By the time they reached the central corridor, Nked had already marked the 3 perpetrators on a printed access log, complete with timestamps, signatures, and the fabricated compliance zone protocol they'd used to justify isolation. The lead MP, a warrant officer with tier-level clearance on his shoulder, didn't ask questions. He simply scanned the log, tapped his comms once, and said, "Confirm 3 detainment units, no interviews, no calls." The rest of the DEFSUR personnel didn't resist. They backed away from their desks, from their workstations, from the hallway where Nked stood quietly at parade rest. Not because she said anything, not because she looked dangerous, because she didn't look at all. And somehow that was worse. By minute 14, the original 3 had been zip-cuffed, stripped of IDs, and escorted to the landing zone for off-base removal. They didn't speak. One tried to meet Nked's eyes on the way out, but her gaze passed over him like he wasn't there. The system hadn't just cracked. It had folded, because somewhere inside every one of those contractors there had always been a fear, buried under swagger and lanyards, that if they pushed the wrong person too far, someone might finally push back. And it hadn't been loud. It had been surgical. Word traveled fast through the facility. 2 admin staffers whispered behind sealed glass. 1 operations clerk sent a message to a sister base. Compliance drill got shut down. Someone big. Not sure who. Whole place locked. The station chief, DEFSUR's on-site lead, hadn't even made it to his office before the warrant officer handed him a sealed document marked with Nked's clearance band. It read like an obituary. Pattern of systemic misconduct identified. Authority revoked under SOCOM Tier 1 audit protocols. From the back of the hallway, 1 Marine staff sergeant leaned toward his peer and whispered, "She didn't even raise her voice." The other replied without hesitation, "She didn't have to. That's what's scary." And Nked? She didn't linger, didn't posture. She walked the corridor like it had never been theirs, because now it wasn't. It belonged to the kind of authority that didn't ask who gave permission. It was permission. The room they gave her wasn't much. A converted supply office with bad lighting and a fan that clicked once every 3 seconds like a countdown no one could stop. But Nked didn't need decor. She needed paper, and they gave her plenty. The files weren't redacted. Not anymore. Once SOCOM intervention was triggered, all jurisdictional shielding evaporated. She sat with printouts, personnel rosters, shift logs, unprocessed complaints, most of them marked resolved without explanation, some stamped peer-reviewed with 0 signatures. She didn't need to search for patterns. They bled off the page. 6 names stood out immediately. 6 women reassigned within the past year under vague pretexts. Disciplinary adjustment, command incompatibility, voluntary early withdrawal. None of them had filed formal charges. But 4 had requested transfers. 2 had medical flags attached to their personnel files. 1 had a breakdown logged, but no counseling follow-up. The most recent case was just 6 weeks prior. She read the notes slowly, hand steady, pen gliding across the margins as she circled every line that reeked of suppression. Subject failed to respond to standard security drill instructions. Escorted to private zone for clarification and attitude recalibration. Released after debrief with no further comment. No rank listed, no timestamp, just vague institutional fog, deliberately constructed to obscure liability. One page had a sticky note still attached. Handled internally, no need to elevate. Nked peeled the note off and folded it once, then dropped it into the trash. She reached for the evaluation sheet. She wasn't here to write a report. She was here to submit a recommendation. And her pen didn't hesitate. Immediate and irreversible revocation of contractor authority. All. Def Sur Ops operations. Suspended pending formal SOCOM investigation. Compliance enforcement protocols to be absorbed by Joint Integrity Command. Navy oversight only. All flagged personnel files from past 12 months reopened for Tier 2 review. She added one more line. This is not a correction. This is a controlled extraction from embedded cultural rot. Then signed the bottom, Admiral B. Nked, Naval Special Warfare Command, SEAL Tier 1 Evaluation Unit, no initials, no rank display, just a name that now carried weight on this base heavier than steel. When the internal liaison arrived, a wide-eyed civilian from DoD's embedded monitoring team, he asked if she had anything to say for the report. She didn't look up from the last folder. No statements, she said. Just actions. He tried again. Is there anything you want the command group to know about why you were here? She finally met his gaze. Not unkind, not hostile, just level. They thought I was sent to observe. He blinked, wrote something down. She let the pause hang, then added softly, I was sent to end it. And he stopped writing, because there was nothing left to add. Official reports wouldn't use her name, but the system felt her just the same. By 400, the command structure that had once propped up Def Sur Ops on this facility had collapsed inward like a failed structure. Not with noise, but with precision cuts. The base commander, Colonel Halvers, was suspended under provisional authority after Nked's SOCOM brief hit the inbox of Pacific Command. He didn't even have time to contest it. The wording was absolute. Failure to exercise oversight on private security protocols. Pending investigation. No appeal, no delay. Just a digital key code revoked and a cold walk to the perimeter. Meanwhile, the internal compliance officer, the one who'd signed off on all 6 of the disciplinary reassignments, had his system access stripped before he'd even finished logging in for the morning shift. A single military police officer waited at his desk with a sealed document and a transport order. Def Sur Ops, gone. Their contract wasn't just pulled from this facility, it was shredded across 9 others before the sun crested the ocean line. Nked's recommendation hadn't been a suggestion, it was a decision. Passed up the chain, validated, and executed with the kind of force that only exists when the special warfare community stops whispering and starts cleaning house. Across the western chain of Navy-aligned posts, sites that had once relied on Def Sur were already shifting their protocols. Compliance checks restructured, private contractor access suspended. Every base commander in the region received the same 2-line memo. Contractor audit initiated. Report all irregularities to SOCOM Integrity Office. NSWC Tier 1 evaluation is now active. They didn't need to explain what that meant. Nked wasn't at the ceremony. There wasn't one. She didn't wait for the aftermath or the apology calls. She boarded a C-17 transport with no insignia and no manifest, leaving behind only a sealed envelope addressed to Naval Legal Services. Inside was the full list of names she'd circled, victims, witnesses, and a few who'd tried and failed to stop the rot. The officer who saw her off asked gently, "Do you want to make a statement before you leave?" Nked shook her head. "Not for me." He nodded, took a step back. "Will someone speak on your behalf?" She glanced at the flight deck, engines already spooling. "They won't need to," she said. "Not after what they've seen." Back on base, the silence was louder than the chopper. Someone asked a senior warrant officer if they'd gotten a quote from the woman who started the purge. He didn't blink. "She didn't give a quote." He looked at the envelope. Just a folder, a pause, and a warning. No headlines, no noise, just transformation. The kind that leaves men waking up the next day unsure why their stomachs feel like guilt. The new guard rotation arrived 2 days later. Different patches, different posture, no contractors. Every man and woman assigned to the checkpoint wore Navy insignia now. Strict chain of command, direct accountability. The gray zone wasn't gray anymore. It had been painted over with protocol. But nobody joked at the perimeter anymore. Nobody smirked at liaisons. Nobody asked if you were admin, intel, or just here to observe. The change didn't come with banners or announcements. It came with quiet, a kind of pressure that sat just behind the eyes of every officer who'd seen what happened. Cameras were reinstalled, real ones this time, live feeds, stored and audited weekly. Random searches were halted, compliance drills discontinued. And the room they used to call PI Zone 3? Sealed, welded shut. Rumor said Nked herself ordered it closed. Nobody confirmed it, but nobody denied it either. In the mess hall, the story traveled sideways. She didn't even raise her voice. She took all three down in 8 seconds. They tried to strip a Tier 1 SEAL, didn't know till they were on the floor. Most of the base hadn't seen her face, but now everyone knew the name, Nked, whispers only, never said loud. Not out of disrespect, but reverence. Because stories like hers didn't end with medals. They ended with shifts in behavior, in power, in the way silence stopped being weakness and started being a warning. One junior officer asked his instructor during compliance orientation, "What if we're unsure how to proceed with a new arrival?" The instructor didn't even look up. He just said, "If she asks if you're sure, you're already not." That phrase stuck. It found its way onto the backs of clipboards, into notepads muttered half-jokingly in the barracks, but no one laughed long, because underneath the story, under the legend, was a truth no one could ignore anymore. That silence could be restraint, that calm could be lethal, that somewhere out there, walking quietly through another base, another checkpoint, another gray zone, was someone just like Nked. And if you were the one making the mistake next time, you wouldn't get a warning. You'd get a decision, one made faster than your next breath. And this time, no one would even remember your name. Would you have obeyed those orders or risked defying them? Should silence be protocol or a weapon? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this story hit hard, smash that like button. Tap subscribe and bell so you never miss what happens next. Share this story, and when the next one pops up, click it. See you tomorrow, same time, brand new Navy SEAL story.